Great. Here's part 1 of the African folktale titled, She Fed a Poor Crippled Beggar Every Day Until He Said, I'm a Billionaire. Part 1 of 3. Approximate. 2,500 words in a single paragraph. In the sun-drenched village of Iganmu, nestled between hills and old whispering baobab trees, lived a woman named Mama Kemi, thin, weathered, and often mistaken for older than her years, yet carrying in her eyes the quiet weight of dignity. She wasn't rich. In fact, she barely had enough to feed her 2 children after her husband died in a tractor accident at the cocoa farm 5 years earlier. But what she had, she shared. Not because she had plenty, but because she knew what it meant to have nothing. Every morning, long before the village rooster stirred the dust with his call, she would rise, wrap her faded blue wrapper around her waist, grind cassava, pick peppers from her tiny garden, and prepare a modest pot of yam porridge. She always made a little extra, even when her own stomach rumbled louder than the cooking pot. Because at the edge of the village, beneath the broken frame of an abandoned colonial church, sat a man people called Baba Dogo, a crippled beggar no one really knew. Some said he came from another land, some claimed he'd been cursed, and others whispered that he once had wealth and lost it in the coastal war. His legs were thin as broomsticks and twisted at the knees, his clothes in tatters, his eyes hidden behind thick curls of gray hair and a wide-brimmed hat. Children were afraid of him. Adults ignored him. But Mama Kemi saw him. She saw past the dirt and deformity. Every afternoon, when the sun began to slide low and the market women shouted their last prices, she would pack a small bowl of food, wrap it in a plastic bag, tie it with old raffia string, and walk to the church ruins barefoot, her heart heavy yet full of quiet purpose. She never spoke much, just greeted him respectfully, handed him the food, and sometimes left a small bottle of water. At first, the beggar only nodded. Then one day he whispered thank you in a deep, trembling voice that startled her. From that day, they began exchanging short, careful conversations. He asked about her children, and she told him about Tund, her stubborn 9-year-old boy who refused to fetch water, and Ada, her 6-year-old who still believed the moon was a broken gourd floating above the clouds. The beggar laughed, a low, rusty sound, and for a brief moment, his eyes lit up, not with madness but with memory. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Rain came, the harmattan blew, and seasons turned like pages of a holy book. Still Mama Kemi came. Still she fed him. One day, she found him coughing violently, his chest rattling like an old kettle. She knelt beside him, placed her calloused hand on his back and said, "Let me bring you herbs." She returned the next morning with a mixture of leaves her grandmother once used for fever and lung sickness. She boiled them, coaxed him to drink, and stayed with him as he vomited and shook through the night. By dawn, the fever had broken. He looked at her, weak but alive, and said, "You don't know who I am." She smiled softly and replied, "I don't need to. I only know what you are today, and today you are hungry." Something in his expression shifted, as if her words touched a buried truth. The village elders began to whisper. Some told her to stop going. Others warned she might be inviting spirits into her home. Even her brother came from the city and scolded her for wasting time on a stranger. "You are a widow, Kemi," he barked. "No one helps a widow. Why should you help a crippled man with no name?" But Mama Kemi, stubborn as her late mother, replied, "Because if I ever sat where he sits, I would want someone to see me too." What no one knew, what even she didn't suspect, was that Baba Dogo watched more than he spoke. He noticed her limp when she thought no one saw. He heard the way she encouraged her children through hunger. He saw the holes in her roof and the quiet dignity with which she accepted her suffering. And deep within him, a long-buried pain began to stir, one that reminded him of a mother he lost in another country, of kindness he had once known before betrayal stripped him of everything. Then came the day everything changed. It was the harmattan season again, and the wind blew fine red dust into everything, into the food, into bedsheets, into breath. Mama Kemi's house, barely standing, collapsed partially when the wind pulled off the roof. Her son fell and injured his arm. She came to the beggar with her hand bandaged, her eye swollen, and her voice cracked from crying, but she still came with food. "Sorry it's cold," she said softly. "There was no firewood today." The beggar stared at her in stunned silence. Then slowly he pulled something from his tattered bag, a tiny metal pendant shaped like a lion's head. He held it to the sun. It glinted gold. Mama Kemi tilted her head. "What is that?" she asked. He looked at her with eyes that suddenly burned with quiet power and said, "It's the key to everything. I think it's time I told you the truth." She frowned, confused. But the beggar only smiled, a soft, gentle smile that stretched wider than it ever had before, and whispered, "You have been feeding a man the world forgot. But I was not always forgotten." That evening, for the first time in months, Mama Kemi returned home with nothing but silence in her ears, replaying his words over and over. She didn't sleep. She stared at the broken roof and wondered who she had really been feeding all these months. And far away, under the broken stone cross of the old church, the beggar sat straighter than ever before and ran his fingers over the pendant with a look that said, "Tomorrow, the world begins again." White heavy check mark. Let me know when you're ready for part 2. Would you like me to continue right away? Here is part 2 of the African folktale. She fed a poor crippled beggar every day until he said, "I'm a billionaire." Part 2 of 3. Approximate. 2,500 words in a single paragraph. The next morning came heavy with grey clouds, and the village of Iganmu stirred slowly under the weight of a strange stillness, as if even the birds had paused to listen for something unseen. Mama Kemi rose as usual, though her body ached from the cold night and her heart beat differently. Something inside her had shifted since the beggar's words. She prepared the food more carefully that day, wiping the calabash clean twice, seasoning the stew with the last bits of dried crayfish, and even placing a sliver of the boiled egg she had saved for her children. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied the knot around the raffia string, and as she walked through the narrow footpath leading to the ruins of the church, her bare feet seemed to feel every thorn and stone, but she didn't stop. When she reached the broken arches of the church walls, she stopped short. The beggar was not there. His usual corner, lined with a flattened sack and a bent iron cup, was empty. For the first time in over a year, his presence was missing, and fear clawed at her chest. "Baba," she called softly. No answer. She stepped closer, setting down the bowl, and looked around. Then, from behind one of the crumbling pillars, came the shuffling sound of footsteps, not the limp drag of a crippled man, but a sure, firm tread. And then she saw him, the same man yet not the same. His face was freshly washed, his beard trimmed short, his hair tied neatly beneath a clean cap. He still leaned slightly to the left, but he no longer crawled or shuffled. He walked, slowly, purposefully. He wore a white tunic, simple but clean, and held in his hand a walking stick carved with lion motifs. "I scared you," he said, his voice warmer, steadier, as though a new man had grown inside the old one. Mama Kemi blinked, stunned. "You look," she started but could not finish. He gave her a small smile and lowered himself gently to the ground. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "Once, I was the son of a chief. Not in this village but in a place far from here. I grew up with gold in my hands, guards at my door, and every wish fulfilled. My name was known in cities you've only heard of in stories. When my father died, I inherited more money than any man should, but I was foolish, full of pride and empty of purpose. I trusted wrong friends, married a woman who loved my crown, not my soul, and when a business rival poisoned our family name, I was left with nothing but ashes. They accused me of fraud. I lost my legs in a car explosion meant to silence me. Everyone disappeared. My wife left. My siblings turned their backs. I was forced to hide, move from country to country. I ended up here, nameless, legless, broken in a land where no one knew me, and I decided I didn't want to be found. Until you. Mama Kemi stared, tears brimming. But why didn't you say anything? Why sit here like... Her voice cracked. He looked at her gently. Because I needed to know. I needed to see if humanity still lived in someone. Everyone I once helped forgot me. But you who had nothing, fed me daily, risked your name, nursed me in the rain, and never asked for anything. Silence stretched between them, deep and powerful. Then he reached into a small satchel at his side and drew out a folded envelope, stained with age but sealed in red wax. I sent a letter, he said, to someone who owes me a great debt. They replied. He handed her the envelope, and her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a printed letter, official-looking, with golden crest stamps at the top. She couldn't read English well, but she recognized numbers. Big numbers. At the bottom was a signature that read, Olawale Durojiyi, CEO, Durojiyi Group International. They're coming today, he said softly, to find me. And when they do, everything changes. And you, Mama Kemi, you're not going to live another day in this world as a forgotten widow. She gasped, hand to her mouth. No, don't say things like that. I didn't do anything worth. But he raised his hand. You did everything worth remembering. And in my world, that's everything. Hours later, the entire village buzzed with confusion. A line of black SUVs rolled through the dusty paths, something Iganmu had never seen before. Men in dark suits stepped out, speaking in hushed tones, carrying files, computers, phones. They walked straight to the ruins of the old church. They didn't ask questions. They knelt before the crippled man and said, Sir, your father's estate is ready. We've been searching for you for 13 years. The villagers gathered like flies, watching from behind trees and huts, whispering, gasping, pointing at Mama Kemi and murmuring her name. Children who once mocked her children now stared in awe. But Mama Kemi stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, overwhelmed and unsure. Then the man, no longer Baba Dogo but now introduced as Mr. Akinwale Durojiyi, heir to a dynasty, founder of a tech empire, turned and beckoned her forward. This woman, he said firmly, is the only reason I am alive today. I owe her more than food. I owe her my future. The men around him nodded, taking notes, snapping photos. Then, before everyone, he handed her a set of keys, shiny and black. This is your house now, he said. Not the broken hut you sleep in. A real house with a gate, a school nearby, and money for your children's dreams. You will never beg again. Not while I breathe. But Mama Kemi didn't take the keys right away. Tears streamed down her face and she whispered, I only did what was right. He smiled. Exactly. And that's why you deserve everything. That night, as the village lights dimmed and crickets sang like choirs, Mama Kemi sat outside her crumbling hut for one last time. Her children slept beside packed bags. She looked up at the stars and whispered a prayer her mother once taught her. Let my kindness go ahead of me. Let it open doors my feet have not yet touched. Far across the field, in a white tent surrounded by guards and flashing lights, Akinwale Durojiyi lay awake, watching the sky too, thinking not of money, but of a woman who gave him food when the world gave him nothing. And in that silent night, something ancient and powerful moved in the land, something that said, no kindness is ever wasted. Here is the final part 3, of the African folktale. She fed a poor crippled beggar every day until he said, I'm a billionaire. Part 3 of 3. Approximate. 2,500 words in a single paragraph. A month had passed since the world of Iganmu was turned upside down, but for Mama Kemi, it still felt like a dream she dared not wake from. The once silent widow who people passed without greeting now lived in a freshly painted, 4-bedroom bungalow on the outskirts of the village, where red clay gave way to paved stones and iron gates. Her roof no longer leaked, her children wore clean uniforms with polished shoes, and each morning began with a scent of fresh bread from a solar-powered oven installed beside the new kitchen. But despite the transformation, Mama Kemi remained unchanged in spirit, rising early, sweeping her compound herself, tying the same old blue wrapper around her waist, now faded even more but still her favorite. Akinwale Durojayi, no longer the beggar in rags but now a man of global repute, had left for the city to finalize business with the foreign partners who had doubted his return. But not before he sat her down beneath the mango tree one last time and said, "What you gave me cannot be bought with all the gold in Lagos. But I will try for the rest of my life to honor it." He promised her a foundation in her name, the Kemi Kindness Fund, focused on feeding and educating widows and orphans across Nigeria and beyond. True to his word, within weeks, trucks arrived bearing sacks of rice, boxes of medicine, and sewing machines for the women of Iganmu. A health clinic was built near the market square and named after her late husband, the Adeyemi Hope Center. The village chief, once known for ignoring the poor, invited her to sit beside him at the village council, calling her our Mother of Honor. But all the titles and attention didn't change her. She still spoke humbly, still corrected her son Tund when he complained about walking to school, and still shared her food with old Ayabola, the blind woman 3 houses down. And though her children were now surrounded by opportunity, she taught them the same song her mother once sang: "What you have in your hands is never more powerful than what you have in your heart." Then one morning, a convoy returned to the village, this time quieter, more reverent. Akinwale stepped out, not in a suit, but in a plain agbada, his walking stick replaced with a lighter cane, his eyes softer than ever before. He asked for Mama Kemi, and when she stepped out, still drying her hands from the laundry basin, he knelt before her in the dust. "I left a broken man," he said. "I return whole because of you." She looked at him, confused. He took her hand. "Not to repay a debt," he said gently, "but to build a new life. With you if you'll have me." Gasps filled the air. From windows, from courtyards, from the children's playground, people watched, astonished. A billionaire, once lost to the world, now kneeling before a widow who had once slept hungry. Mama Kemi stared at him, her heart thudding in her chest. "But I'm not young. I'm not. I'm just a woman who shared food." He looked up, eyes glistening. "And I am just a man who almost lost his soul until your food fed more than my stomach. Fed my hope. I don't need a queen with a crown. I need a woman with a heart like yours." Silence fell between them. And then, slowly, Mama Kemi knelt too. Not because she needed to, but because love, when it is real, kneels not from shame but from gratitude. "Then let us build something no storm can tear down," she whispered. The village erupted in celebration. Drums rolled. Elders danced. Even children who had once mocked the crippled beggar now painted his face in chalk and called him Baba Ife, Father of Love. In the weeks that followed, news spread across regions. Journalists came. Interviews were held. But Mama Kemi always answered simply, "I didn't change a man. I just saw him." On the day of their wedding, the clouds parted like a curtain and the sun poured golden light on the village square where the ceremony was held. Traditional dancers spun in circles. Village women ululated until their voices cracked. And as Mama Kemi walked down the aisle in a gown sewn by local seamstresses, simple, beautiful, laced with blue threads like the wrapper she once wore, every eye turned misty. Akinwale stood waiting, cane in hand, tears in his eyes. When she reached him, he whispered, "You fed me when I had nothing. Now let me spend my life feeding your joy." They exchanged vows beneath the baobab tree, where the breeze carried blessings from ancestors. That night, under the stars, they danced barefoot in the dust, surrounded by music and firelight. But far beyond the laughter and lights, the story of their love took on a life of its own. It became a folk tale whispered by griots to children around campfires. A tale not of riches and palaces, but of a poor widow, a broken man, and a bowl of food given with quiet dignity. In every village where someone feeds a stranger, someone recalls Mama Kemi. And whenever a forgotten soul is seen, someone remembers the man who once was called Baba Dogo. For in the heart of Africa, they say, it is not the throne that makes the king, but the kindness of the woman who shares her last meal. And thus the story lives on, not just in books or speeches, but in every simple act of humanity that reminds us, no kindness is ever small, and no one is ever truly forgotten. White heavy check mark that completes the 3-part emotional, realistic African folktale. Would you like me to extract